Omega Morales and the Curse of El Cucuy is a middle-grade novel inspired by Mexican folklore. In the story, Omega must face her fears to stop El Cucuy and save her family. Hi, I'm Dan Skinner, and welcome to the Kids Bookshelf. Ahead, we'll explore the book and talk with the author about the inspiration behind it, so you can decide if this is a book you'd like to add to your kids' library. I requested and was provided with a copy of the book, but this video is not sponsored. Laekan Zea Kemp is the author of numerous teen, middle grade, and picture books. She joins us to talk about Omega Morales and the Curse of El Cucuy. Laekan, welcome to the Kids Bookshelf.
Thank you so much.
Well, this is the second book to feature Omega Morales. So before we talk about this latest book, tell us about Omega and her special abilities.
So Omega is a 12-year-old girl with a lot of big feelings, and not just because she's a 12-year-old girl, but also because she comes from a family of empaths. They have the ability to manipulate the emotions of others through things like food, candle wax, weaving, etc., except for Omega, whose empathic abilities are a little bit more chaotic than the rest of her family. So book one is all about her journey of self-discovery and figuring out why her powers work differently or seem to work differently, all while trying to track down the identity of a mysterious new witch in town who happens to be La Lechuza, another monster from Mexican and Chicano folklore, just like El Cucuy, who is the monster at the center of the sequel.
And she has friends that help her out, although sometimes she knows she has to go it alone. But tell us a little bit about Carlito and Clau.
Yeah, so Carlitos is her cousin, which if you're a member of the Latino community, you know that cousins are just kind of like built-in best friends. I was an only child growing up, so my first friends were my cousins, and Carlitos' character is definitely my way of celebrating those relationships. Carlitos is also a big source of comedic relief in the book. He and Omega are often butting heads when she wants to, take risks and try to track down this monster. He's kind of the voice of reason who's trying to convince her that they need to go back to safety. And then Clau is Omega's other BFF. She also happens to be a ghost. In the first book in the series, we get sort of hints of how she became a ghost and how she ended up sort of in Omega's family's care. But in the second book, we get to dive a lot deeper into who Clau is and where she comes from. She's such an exuberant and joyful character, and so I really loved giving her more of the spotlight in book two.
And Omega also has a magical support animal. So tell us about that.
Yeah, so just like how in the real world we have emotional support animals who help people with all sorts of things, Omega's family decides that while she's trying to figure out how to control her empathic abilities, it might be helpful for her to have an emotional support pet that can be kind of a source of grounding for her when she's starting to feel overwhelmed by all of those big emotions. So in book two, they decide to get her a pet alebrije. Basically, an alebrije is a mythical creature that has characteristics of the four elements, earth, wind, fire, and water. They're actually a relatively modern folk tradition out of Mexico. They were created in the 40s by artist Pedro Linares, but they're so beautiful and are usually painted in these really bright colors. And so incorporating them into this story was really inspired by just me wanting to live out this fantasy of, what if they were real and what would it be like to have them as a pet? Because in my mind, that was just like the coolest thing in the world.
Now, we talked a little bit about that first book. Is it important that people have read that first book, or will the second one stand alone?
So the series is a continuation of the story. So you do need to read Omega Morales and the Legend of La Lechuza first before you read Omega Morales and the Curse of El Cucuy.
So tell us about this second book.
Yeah, so this second book it starts immediately after the first. This book takes place over the course of Dia de Muertos, which is Day of the Dead. And without spoiling anything from the first book, for those who haven't read it, I'll just say that obviously a new monster comes to town, El Cucuy, it's in the title, and he starts snatching kids left and right. And once again, it's up to Omega and her friends to stop him.
These two books are based on folklore from Mexico, and a lot of that folklore is known in Texas as well. So it sounds like you've probably got a lot of other stories that you can draw upon for future editions of Omega's adventures.
Yeah, so I actually have about 15,000 words written of a book 3. I do have a monster in mind for that book. I would love for it to focus on a character from folklore called El Sombreron, who, just like with El Cucuy and La Lechuza, there's lots of different versions of him across Latin America. But the version I would focus on is the one people might recognize, big sombrero, big cowboy hat, playing the guitar. And so I have part of that story written. I really wanted to do 3 books. That was my original vision. Unfortunately, my publisher is currently not interested in a 3rd book, and that's mostly due to lack of sales. We know how this goes. So I don't know if a 3rd book will ever happen, but if people were to suddenly start reading the first 2 books in the series, it wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility. I think they just want to see that there's demand. But yeah, there's so much rich folklore, even just specifically where I live in the southwestern United States, in Texas. There's so much rich folklore that I would love to be able to dive into if I had the opportunity.
So I want to come back to what you were talking about. There are different versions of these folklore stories out there. So how do you decide which version you're going to go with to form the basis of your novel?
Well, luckily I'm writing fantasy, and luckily as a writer, using my imagination is one of my favorite parts of the job. For El Cucuy specifically, I looked at as many variations of him as I could, and I ended up creating sort of a hodgepodge from all of these different sources. I even looked beyond Latin America to read about the boogeyman legends that existed in Europe and Asia and Africa. Sometimes he was described as having long legs like a spider. Other times he was this like one-eyed cyclops figure. Some versions of him abducted adults as well as children. In the book, Omega and her friends even find a magical tome in this magical library that details the history of boogeymen all over the world, and they use that information to figure out how to defeat him. But it was really a combination of research and also stories that I heard growing up. When I was growing up, pretty much everything that went bump in the night was Cucuy. If my grandmother didn't like the girl my cousin was dating, she was also El Cucuy. So I definitely took bits and pieces from different folklore to create the version of El Cucuy that Omega faces in the book, including giving him that signature pumpkin head. Also, just like the folklore, he watches you while you sleep before snatching you from your bed. But I also took the liberty and I gave him the ability to shapeshift into human form so that he could have a presence during the daytime as well. So like I said, it was just a combination of everything I'd read, everything I'd been exposed to, and then also what works for the story in this particular plot.
So Omega is 12 years old, as you mentioned. She faces these really wild challenges and scary events in her life. Why do you think that readers will identify with her?
I think kids who may be more sensitive than their peers, kids who have really big emotions and don't always know what to do with them, will definitely connect with Omega. Omega is 100% inspired by me as a child. I was deeply emotional, and I also dealt with a lot of anxiety. I worried a lot. I was afraid of a lot of things. And when I was creating Omega's character, I really wanted to figure out a way to turn that sensitivity into a superpower. And so that's what I hope kids will get out of Omega's journey too, that having a big heart and feeling things deeply is a strength rather than a weakness.
There is a question that I like to ask authors of fiction, and it's this. If you could spend a day in real life with one of the characters from your novel, who would it be and why?
Yeah, this one is easy for this particular book. The Alebrije for sure. I'm a big animal person. My dogs are my life. So that's definitely the character that I'd want to see come to life.
Now, in the flap of the book, you say you have 3 goals when it comes to storytelling. Would you share those with us?
Yeah, my goals are very simple. They are to make people laugh, cry, and crave Mexican food. I love writing emotionally moving, character driven stories, and I also love food. So if you're hungry and experiencing a full spectrum of emotions while reading my books, then I think I've done my job.
Well, I'm a big Tex-Mex fan, and I used to live in San Antonio, so I've never been able to find anything that compares to it in other states I've lived in. So I am sure this book could definitely make me hungry.
Yeah, the food is magical in and of itself, in my opinion.
So what's next for you?
I have a picture book called Desert Song that will be out on June 4th. It will be available in both English and Spanish. It's another story set in Texas, and it's about a boy playing in a family band to an audience of his ancestors in an ode to family, to music, and to the desert itself.
This middle grade novel is Omega Morales and the Curse of El Cucuy by Laekan Zea Kemp. Laekan, thank you for talking with me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, if you'd like to purchase Omega Morales and the Curse of El Cucuy, I've placed a link for you in the description below. Well, thank you for watching this edition of the Kids Bookshelf. And if you'd like to see more videos about children's books and their authors, be sure to subscribe, like, and click on the bell to be notified about future programs. And if you're interested in books for young adult and older readers, be sure to check out my Some Books Considered channel. You'll find a link to it in the description as well. I'm Dan Skinner. Until next time, keep sharing the gift of reading.